It breaks my heart. We have to fight this battle all over again. I mean, it should not be happening. I mean, this is just outrageous.
Tonight, the landmark ruling, the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade.
I am worried that they're going to come after my contraceptive rights, my right to have an IUD, my right to birth control. I am worried that they're going to come after gay marriage next.
I'm from Texas. I have friends in Texas who are surrounded by states that also have banned abortions. They can't get one, and now they don't have a choice.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions.
To raise the dignity of woman and give her freedom of choice in this area is an extraordinary event.
The freedom to have an abortion is now legal in every state.
There may be a misconception out there that Roe v. Wade came out of some East or West Coast agenda, and that is about as far from the truth as it could possibly be. My name is Victoria Foe. I am and have continued to be a biologist.
All of us creatures, plants and animals and fungi and algae, we all came from a common ancestor. And so we share all of these really, really basic things in common. What I've worked on during my scientific life are things that all of those organisms share. And sexual reproduction is one of those things.
It wasn't some enlightenment that pried open the doors of science for women. It was actually the Soviet Union launching of Sputnik. The year after the Russians launched the satellite, the U.S. funded NASA, which is best known because they would eventually, and within 10 years, put a man on the moon. But what's less known is that they also created fellowships to bring men and women into STEM because they thought that we really need to train up potential scientists and engineers for the next generation, and let's not cut out women because there's some very smart women there too. This is relevant to me because I went to graduate school on a NASA fellowship. I arrived in '63 for undergraduate school and got through in 3 years because we needed to try to have enough money to put my brother to college. It was a really most remarkable time, and a most remarkable time to be in Austin, of all places, because it was kind of an oasis in a very conservative state. The war in Vietnam built slowly during these years, and that just was the heartbeat that drove what became just this complete rebellion against the 50s.
If a vocal minority prevails over reason and the will of the majority, this nation has no future. To the young people of this nation, I understand why they are concerned about this war. I respect your idealism. I share your concern for peace. I want peace as much as you do.
Everything that came from the 50s got questioned during this period. The word that's now used is intersectional, but there were people rebelling against everything. The gay movement, what became the women's movement, the anti-war movement, all manner of examination and re-examination of the values of our parents and of the current government. And it was just this prodigious, exciting upwelling that characterized the late 60s and the early 70s. It was a wonderful time to be here. But I was really out of place at this dorm. It was a dorm where recruiters for airline stewardesses came through and looked at all the girls who would be a proper stewardess. The same thing for Miss Texas and Miss America, sort of checking out who would be proper applicants. It was just a complete foreign land to me. I mean, it took me a while to figure out how to deal with being hit on by men. It was just so inappropriate, and men can behave so badly, and they behaved a lot worse back then. And yes, I did drive a motorcycle. But I sort of discovered that wearing boots always gave them, like, what am I getting into? I think I'll just let her walk by. You know, they were part of my armor. I joined a department eventually where there was not a single woman faculty member, and there wouldn't be until sometime after I graduated. I don't know whether you can understand today just how pervasive the assumption was, the cultural assumption was, women can't take these high-profile jobs.
What's wrong with her? She's a woman, isn't she?
They can't be lawyers. They can't run for office. They can't be scientists. They can't have big dreams because they would get pregnant. And it was, of course, assumed that she who carried the egg rather than he who donated the sperm would then be conscripted for the next 18 years of devoted care to the resulting offspring. And so that was the rationale for why it really wasn't worth educating women.
But I can remember the good old days when there were all men in my department.
So I had been in graduate school for 2 years when this stunning Amazon walked through the door with sandy red hair down to her waist and joined the lab that I was already in. Just, whoa.
My name is Judy Smith, and I was born in July 4th, 1944, in Durant, Oklahoma.
Judy, she was just a natural-born organizer. I mean, just a natural-born leader. Calm, clear-thinking, smart, and just, you know, if she walked down the street, people would probably follow her. She was so certain she knew where she was going.
One of the interesting things about feminism is the first thing is understanding this and dealing with this and putting it into some sort of view that you can look at the world, and then, okay, then, after you could do that, you go.
In the spring of '69, she said, we're going to have a meeting at my house of a group of women, and we're just going to sit around and talk about general problems of women.
Just said, let's start doing this thing. Whatever it is, let's do it. And so we started having these backyard consciousness raising groups. And we just had heard that these are the things that you talk about here. So talk about how you were raised and what were the sex roles, and talk about oppression of your own personal oppression and what does that mean, and talk. So it was like, goodness, this was so much more interesting.
Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. She was such a powerful influence on my life, and I always think I wouldn't be here today without her. My name is Barbara. My last job was an immigration professor at the University of Texas Law School, but abortion rights and women's rights has always been a very important part of my life, and that's really how I started my career and why I went to law school. I was initially drawn to Judy because she was a visionary, she was articulate, she was intimidating. Vic became a friend of mine, and Judy was really what I would say our fearless leader. We became very close friends because we ate in a food co-op, and so we cooked together and ate together. We were also socializing and living together. Those meetings, women's liberation, they were life-changing. We didn't have an agenda. It was just 10 to 15 women talking about things, topics that women had never talked about before. One of the things that was very important to us was sort of exploring our bodies, because going to these male doctors and having these like cold speculums put up you. So one of the things we did is we all explored what female orgasms were like and what sexuality was like. Just the beginning of thinking about other ideas about women. But I think it was really also exploring friendships between women in a way that we had never done before.
It was basically an energy around, let's discuss what's happening to us as women. How can we take political action on that? Came second.
There was a lot of discussion about what limited what we might want to accomplish in our lives.
We looked for projects that would really help women. And very early on, we identified birth control as a key thing that would help all women. This issue of you can get pregnant and not be able to finish your schooling or get jobs still was the primary barrier, keeping women out. So it was completely clear to me from the beginning, for issues of poverty, for issues of women's rights, that the keystone that had to be removed from this barrier was solving this issue of birth control.
Those of us who got involved in the women's liberation discussion, a lot of us, because we were friends, also had an interest in this whole area of birth control. And we would have our conversations around that in our women's group, and you'd go, okay, what do you do? Well, you start a referral center.
Let's do it. To be of use, this would be really helpful.
It's not like, can we do it? It's like, we're doing this. So we got our hammers out and hammered up a little room.
You shouldn't think of something very sophisticated. It was this little closet room that we hammered up in the Y,
which was located on Guadalupe Street in Austin, across from the university. It was very organic. It had very little structure, just like most everything we did back then.
The very first thing that Jude and I did was turn to the literature and make a list of what were the most effective and safest birth control methods available. I mean, there wasn't a lot available. There was foam, there were diaphragms, there were condoms. What were the risks, did we think, in taking birth control pills? And assume maybe that would be all that was needed, but then we found nobody would prescribe them.
In 1969, you could not get birth control at the Student Health Center at the University of Texas unless you were married or you could show that you had a marriage license and that you were going to be married within 30 days.
Though there was this kind of network, well, Dr. Rayleigh will prescribe birth control pills, or if you go to the health center and have terrible acne problems, you may be able to get birth control pills. So we just compiled this information and found doctors who, without hassling you or lecturing you, would just regard birth control pills as something that women should have access to.
Those of us that had jobs on campus, for example, I was a secretary, which was one of the few things you could do if you're a female, would sneak into the Spanish department and use the mimeograph machine at night so we could have these posters that you could put up on campus announcing our next meetings.
We leafleted, we did serious lectures. I was on radio shows, often debating with this Catholic priest who insisted that because of the great promiscuity of women, it was absolutely important to keep birth control and abortion illegal.
As word spread, ironically or not ironically, the Student Health Center that refused to provide any birth control prescriptions, information, whatever, would send students to us. Now, we provided information to women throughout Austin, throughout Travis County, but we began to get referrals from many other places.
I mean, we did not start out about abortion at all. But the problem was that very soon, almost immediately, we were hit with women for whom birth control information was no longer appropriate. They were pregnant and desperate to not be pregnant. Absolutely desperate. I mean, just heartbreakingly desperate.
Does anybody know?
I just didn't know who to turn to.
The thing we were really committed to right off the top was discouraging unsafe abortion, because I'm sure you know that there was a great deal of that.
So a lot of what we did was actually to say, don't use illegal, very dangerous methods. But I can also remember sitting in that little room still and being told that someone died from going to San Antonio and having that done. So that was life at that time. It wasn't a totally unusual thing to have long-term reproductive damage and death.
Doctors would give our name as we evolved into providing abortion information.
They didn't want the liability. If those crazy women will help, let them do it. So we got 6 to a dozen people a day.
You know what? There are doctors, we've made arrangements. There are planes that fly to California and New York, and we can put you in touch with those people. You can get on that plane, but that's pretty expensive.
Most of us didn't have cars back then, and certainly cell phones didn't exist or any of these things. So Jude's boyfriend had a truck, and so Jude and I went to Piedras Negras and interviewed this doctor who had a clinic. I've talked to people since who've had abortions in hotel rooms and people's houses, but this was not that. This was a medical clinic with an actual anesthesiologist. So we went and interviewed him and looked at the facility and discussed things with him and worked out a price.
And on occasion, we actually drove the women down because they themselves didn't have cars to actually get there. And we would end up, in some cases, driving them to Mexico. When you drove people down, depending on, it got pretty known what you were doing. Like, you're this little white kid driving down in there, and there's another little white kid in the car with you, and they're both women, and you're both going. So there was sort of an extortion possibility there. So we would always kind of figure out how to deal with that, depending on who was on guard and what happened. And we also got fairly harassed sometimes, but because, again, people feel free, like Vic was saying, the doctor, when you come for birth control, they feel free to consider you, whatever. Well, the same thing with this. I mean, obviously, if people think you're going there to get an abortion, then you're in that category of total slut or whatever. So it's quite a right to treat you any horrible way they want. So that was part of the deal of getting through it.
Women who rode with you, they didn't want to talk about anything, really. They were just kind of in a state of shock, and you were helping them. So it wasn't like, let's chat about stuff. This was a life and death thing for women. I mean, this was their gratitude at finding someone who would help them out of this situation. I mean, it's a really, really big deal.
Famous story, of course, is that we had this phone that hung in the hall. It was supposed to be a pay phone, and the Y supported it somewhat and all that. But what happened is we posted that phone number everywhere. And then people would call that phone number, and we were right there in our little office, and we'd jump out because we'd know that'd be for us, and we'd talk on that phone. But we also knew it was bugged. You know, you could hear the little click, click. So we never told the information on that phone. And that was the other thing, you'd have to train people. You know, you can talk for a while, and you want to be supportive. You don't want to let someone just say, no, you have to call this other number. But you just do it, very carefully, but you never give real information. You have to make that happen somewhere else. The first part of the conversation often was figuring out what the woman was really asking us, because it was usually, I have a friend. It was very rarely I. So then after that call, you'd figure out a way to get that person the real information.
At one point, my bank statements, envelopes were all slid open and then retaped closed. So I went to the bank and I said, what is this about? Because it kept happening. And they said, that's not us, that's federal government opening bank statements and looking. We don't know who the informant was. There was clearly in our midst, somebody who was handing information to the FBI because the stuff they knew was just crazy.
As is mentioned in my FBI file, this was very important to the FBI that we went and bought food in a wholesale market in San Antonio. Just the idea that the FBI thought the fact that you ate in a collective was a threat, you would have to laugh about.
Betty's only 16, and that makes her your responsibility under law.
What if I don't want to be?
Betty, what you want or don't want isn't really important in the eyes of the law.
But I'm the one who's pregnant.
It was a felony to assist or aid and abet an abortion.
It was presumably aimed at doctors and backroom alley abortionists. But help is a poorly defined term, and we were most definitely helping women get abortions. And so we did not know what our criminal liability would be.
We were going to provide this information regardless of what the consequences were. But we knew at the time that what we were doing was illegal. Let's put it that way.
And at some point for me, it was like, we can't rescue women one at a time. We've got to get this law changed. So when it appeared in the newspaper that they were going to rewrite the criminal code, including the abortion law, I thought, well, there's some information they need. And I had, at that point, a huge stack of all of the various organizations that endorsed different levels of decriminalization of abortion. And many of the churches supported decriminalizing abortion. At that point, I think I was 24 or 25, and, you can't go in your sneakers and your work shirt and your denim. So I dressed up to look not so much like a hippie, went into Senator Kennard or Creighton's office and said, I work on this issue, I care about this issue, here's something I think would be helpful. And they hired me on the spot as a legislative assistant. So I had to go and take a leave of absence for 6 months from my graduate school fellowship. It was very eye-opening for me. I mean, I remember one congressman who said if his wife got an abortion, he would kill her. So we had very good contacts with people who had had abortions or who were really concerned about this issue. And so it wasn't hard at all for me. It would have been very hard for the senators. It wasn't hard for me to get them to testify. The hearing was riveting. I was so proud of it. A friend of mine who had a 5-year-old child and had gotten pregnant with her husband who'd gotten redrafted to Vietnam and didn't want to be in the situation of having a second child that she couldn't support with a husband in Vietnam. And so she had been so determined that she just basically beat herself with the corner of a book. Just beat herself, and managed to sterilize herself. She went up and testified with her little girl and just explained, this is what I did, and I was just desperate. And that really is the condition of so many of the women we saw, is just complete desperation. They would have done anything to have ended these pregnancies. There were 2 women emergency ward nurses from Dallas who testified also extremely graphically about the cases that they saw. The whole coat hanger image and the discussion of knitting needles, etc., was because if you could put something sharp up you and break the amniotic sac, your body would bring you into a miscarriage. But you could also get just horrible infections or hemorrhage, or people coming into the emergency ward with self-induced abortion infections and hemorrhaging, etc., was something that they saw too much of, and they were willing to testify about that. We wanted it to be known what goes on out of sight normally.
My friend, she's been a lifelong friend, told me about her abortion experience where she got a name of somebody in Waco, I believe, who was a veterinarian, who packed her uterus with tubing and induced a miscarriage and an infection that she nearly died from. So she was back in Austin with high fever and going to the emergency room.
I mean, the thing that this did was kind of tear this Band-Aid off, and the press was like, good God, this is going on and we don't even know about it. It's all hidden normally. Well, you do need to know about this. This is what your daughters and your sisters and your mothers have to go through because of this law.
Sarah Weddington was one of the 2 female lawyers that we knew in Austin, Texas. She had gone to law school with Judy Smith's boyfriend, and so that is how we knew Sarah.
We were concerned that we might be running some risk by actually doing the referral service. So we wanted to talk to someone. So that's where we talked to Sarah Weddington. just saying to her, we're worried about this. Is there any way that you can kind of research it for us and tell us what our situation is here so that we'll at least know?
And I remember a day in Austin, Texas, when some women came to me and said, Sarah, do you know what's happening? And I said, well, I'm not sure. And they said, women from this community and this state are going to Mexico for illegal abortions. And they are coming back with severe medical problems. They're coming back with infections and all sorts of things. We want to tell them where the good places are to go. Can we do that, or would we be prosecuted? And I started the research on a case.
Sarah said, oh, that's interesting. I'll look into it. We were just sitting around saying, wow, I wonder if we could challenge the Texas abortion law. I probably thought, wow, this is a time where the courts can actually do some good.
And so I just said to her, let's go to court, Sarah. We've done all this other stuff. You know, we'll keep doing it, but if we can go to court, maybe that'll help.
She graduated high in her class and couldn't get a job, the job that all of her male classmates could get. Nobody would hire her. She was female. That's why she took this case.
It was their efforts that really got me involved with the issue and really did directly lead to Roe versus Wade.
And it's classic. We actually raised money for the case through bake sales.
The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government.
So Sarah's trying to find me everywhere, right, to tell me that the Roe v. Wade decision had been issued. So she calls me, what? Because it was decided on a principle that we didn't even think they were going to decide it on. We were thinking it was going to be equal protection or something, and they did privacy. Sarah had made her arguments, due process, equal protection, all that, and then privacy was just a little side thing. And that was the decision, and we were just like, oh my God.
The court said that under the Constitution, the right of privacy should guarantee to people in this nation a maximum freedom of choice about issues. In the past, issues like whether to send your children to public or private school, the miscegenation marriage statutes, whether or not to use birth control, a whole series of things that were added to by the Supreme Court in saying there was a right of privacy about pregnancy.
I am so proud of the 50 years since Roe. Before that, there were so few women who managed to really make it to high levels of accomplishment. And now we're everywhere, in places where men said, oh, women, they can't do this. In sports, incredible athletes. In physics, discoverers of pulsars. Of the dark hole at the middle of our galaxy, those were women. Because of birth control and the safety net of abortion beneath it, we've been able to do amazing things. The roll call of women's magnificence in the last 50 years because of this change in the law is just remarkable.
I do remember quite clearly where I was when Roe was decided. At Northeastern in law school. And I remember thinking, well, that's done, and now we can move on to the next fight. How wrong we were. How wrong we were. I still think it's horrific what's happened, you know, and a tragedy and a travesty.
It breaks my heart we have to fight this battle all over again. I mean, it should not be happening. I mean, this is just outrageous.
The same forces that have criminalized reproductive choices are the same forces that want to provide no benefits afterwards. So when you look at states like Texas, they will criminalize reproductive choices, but once your child is born, they will provide no support whatsoever.
It's really well understood And it's been studied carefully that this lack of access to birth control education, to birth control, and to abortion, it is a driver of poverty. So the excuse may be morality, but it is cruelty. I've had 2 abortions in my life, and I want to say that, It's important to know. Sarah Weddington, Barbara, and I all had abortions, and were completely committed to this as an important thing that women needed access to.
It is okay to use the word abortion. Remember, you weren't supposed to even say the word abortion. We were supposed to say, I don't know what, instead of just saying I had an abortion. Abortion is medical care. Abortion is medical care like everything else.
Sarah Weddington, she probably wouldn't have been able to finish law school if she hadn't had an abortion.
I was in the courtroom. Just before the judges come in, there is a hush. And I had a flashback to that clinic in Mexico and to my feelings about it, and then my determination as time went by that no woman should have to go through that, and that I would do anything I could to see that that was not necessary.
And I had one when I was married later in life and one as a graduate student. And I would not have been able to do the things I did scientifically had that not been available. And I have no regrets.
What I would want to say to them is, don't let them take this right away. It should be your decision, but only if you fight to save it will it be kept.
I guess I would like to remind the next generation of what the anthropologist Margaret Mead said: never underestimate what a small number of committed people can do to change the world. In fact, that's the only thing that's ever changed the world.
You have to think big to get some big things done.
Well, I think it's still the same fight, and I actually think when you look at voting patterns, there are more people that are pro-choice.
It's going to begin with all of us organizing in the streets, in our homes, talking to our friends. When you feel like you've got right on your side, and when you love the people you're fighting with and for, you just have so much courage.
When you're young, you have just a very different look on life. Everything's possible. You can change the world, and you have enough time to do it.
Today is the beginning.
Because we're not going back.
Make it right, make it right. I'm gonna take back what's mine. Make it right, and make it right. I'm gonna take back what's mine like I do it all the time. Red alert, maybe you haven't heard. The rebels are back, we're taking over the world. Not a test and talking life and death. We're giving them hell and showing them who knows best. The moment is here, it's up to us all now. That's how we keep fighting, sparks igniting. Make it right, make it right. I'm gonna take back what's mine. Make it right, and make it right. I'm gonna take back what's mine like I do it all the time. 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 The moment is here, it's up to us all now. That's how we keep fighting, sparks igniting. I'm gonna take back what's mine, make it right and make it right. I'm gonna take back